So the lesson I'm sharing today is one I recently did with my Algebra 2 class on transformations. So transformations is something that the students probably saw a few years before in Algebra 1, but I approach this as if they haven't really seen it before because a lot of them don't remember or they're very, very, very rusty. So last year when I introduced transformations, I just went from the textbook, and the textbook just says, here's what transformations look like on a graph. This is what we call them, so there's different labels for each type of transformation. And then this is what it looks like in the equation. So I kind of just introduced all of that. We took notes, and then I was like, okay, do these problems where you're identifying these different transformations based on either the graph or the equation, and then, label them appropriately and all of that. And the students really struggled with it. Not a lot of it stuck initially. They were consistently asking for help. They really struggled, and I think it really stressed them out to introduce it in that way where we just took notes on it and then tried to apply it. So this year I wanted to take a different approach to make it much less of a headache and to kind of chop it up a little bit to make it a little easier to understand at a time. So my idea for this year was I initially wanted them to recognize what transformations look like visually. So I created this game, this activity in Desmos. So Desmos is mostly math related. So in Desmos, I went in and I put in all of these equations here. So we have all these different cards of these different graphs. What the activity does is it pairs students up together, and the partner's wanting to eliminate from these graphs. So the person who's guessing has all of these graphs show up initially. Then they ask a question. So initially, this student asked, is it a straight line? The partner said no, so he would have clicked on all of these straight lines to eliminate the linear. And eventually, he found the right one after 7 questions. My idea for this was that the students would use their own vocabulary. But what I was after was I wanted them to be able to tell visually about how they're different so they can really understand what the difference is. And then after the students played 1 to 2 games, we took a break and then we looked at together as a class what types of questions were we asking. And so we started talking about the differences that we're seeing between these graphs. That was awesome because it opened up the discussion to start putting these official vocabulary words to what they were already seeing. So they had already on their own started to identify these differences. Now we put these labels on them, and then they resumed the game, and I asked them to use these vocabulary words to eliminate as much as we could. Okay, so this pair was able to find their graph in 4 questions. So family first, quadratic, absolute value, and then we asked here, is it horizontally translated? It was no, and so is that the vertex is at 0, 0, and so he knew that it was this one here. So this one said they're both linear, this one said they're both quadratic, this one is even more specific, they're both quadratic and above 0, 0.
I knew that the lesson was successful the next day when the students essentially taught themselves the last piece of the transformations unit. They used equations to graph the functions on their calculators, and once they saw what was happening visually, they could connect these pieces with the corresponding parts of the equations, and then they could successfully use the proper vocabulary to describe how the function was transformed, and this was only using the equation. Introducing the transformations using Desmos, it definitely provided the students with the experience to learn and retain the information successfully, especially when we compare it to the traditional textbook lesson.